The thunder of approaching hooves echoed through the valley as Winona Lewis stood frozen on her father's porch, watching the dust cloud rise from the horizon. Wyoming Territory, 1876, a year that had started with promise but was rapidly descending into despair. Her father's ranch was failing, and with her mother 6 months in the grave, Winona had begun to notice the calculating look in her father's eyes whenever wealthy ranchers visited their struggling homestead. The rider materialized from the dust, tall and broad-shouldered atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. Orion Hayes was new to these parts, having arrived from Texas just 3 months prior, but his reputation preceded him. He'd purchased the old Donovan place and doubled its cattle in a matter of weeks. Now, at 28, he was said to be the most eligible bachelor in the territory. Winona tucked a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear as her father, Harold Lewis, emerged from the house with an almost predatory smile. "Mr. Hayes," he called out, descending the porch steps. "What a pleasant surprise." Orion dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. His eyes, bluer than a summer sky, flickered briefly to Winona before returning to her father. "Mr. Lewis," he nodded, removing his hat. "Thought I'd ride over to discuss that water rights agreement we mentioned last week." Harold's smile widened. Of course. Winona, fetch Mr. Hayes some coffee." As Winona turned to enter the house, she felt her father's hand on her elbow squeezing too tight. "And make yourself presentable," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "Mr. Hayes is a man of means." The implication wasn't lost on her. At 22, Winona had rejected 3 suitors her father had practically shoved at her. But lately, with the ranch's debts mounting, Harold Lewis had grown desperate. In the kitchen, Winona's hands trembled as she prepared the coffee. Through the window, she could see the 2 men deep in conversation, her father gesticulating wildly toward the eastern pasture. The fertile land that butted up against Hayes' property was the only thing of value they had left. When she returned with the tray, her father's eyes gleamed with a fervor she recognized all too well. "Winona, darlin'," Harold said, his voice syrupy with false affection, "Mr. Hayes and I have been discussing a potential arrangement that might benefit us all." She set the tray down, her stomach knotting with apprehension. "Your father tells me you're quite the skilled homemaker," Orion said, his expression unreadable. "Says you manage this place almost single-handedly since your mother's passing." "I do what needs doing, Mr. Hayes," Winona replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Something in his eyes, a warmth, perhaps made her wonder if he was merely being polite or if there was genuine interest there. Harold cleared his throat. "I've offered Mr. Hayes the eastern pasture water rights and all at a generous price." He paused, and the knot in Winona's stomach tightened. "With one condition." "And what condition might that be, father?" she asked, though she already knew that you come as part of the bargain. The silence that followed was deafening. Winona felt as though the ground had opened beneath her feet. She'd known her father was desperate, but to trade her like cattle, "Mr. Lewis," Orion began, his voice low and measured. "I came here to discuss legitimate business, and that's what I'm offering," Harold interrupted. "Legitimate business. My daughter needs a husband, you need a wife." The pasture would be her dowry. Winona's face burned with humiliation. "Father, please quiet, girl," Harold snapped. "You'll be 23 next month. It's high time you settled down." Orion stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the porch boards. His jaw was tight with barely contained anger. "Mr. Lewis, I'm not in the habit of treating women like property to be bartered." Harold's expression darkened. "Listen here, Hayes. That pasture's the only thing standing between you and controlling the entire valley's water supply. You know it, I know it. 20 acres and a ready-made wife is more than fair." "I'm not for sale." Winona finally found her voice, hands balled into fists at her sides. Orion turned to her, his expression softening momentarily before he looked back at Harold. There was something dangerous in his eyes now, a quiet fury that made even Harold Lewis take a step back. "You're right about one thing, Lewis," Orion said, his voice eerily calm. "I do want that land." He paused, looking from father to daughter. "But I'll be damned if I'll participate in trading a woman like she's livestock." Harold's face reddened. "Now see here, no, you see here." Orion took a step closer to the older man. "If that's how you value your own daughter, then I'll buy the whole damn place." Winona's breath caught in her throat. The whole place, Harold sputtered. What are you talking about? Your ranch, all of it. Orion's eyes locked with Winona's for a moment. Name your price. Harold laughed nervously. This is my family homestead, and you were just willing to trade your daughter for a fraction of it, Orion countered. So I'm offering to buy it all, every acre, and then your daughter will be free to do as she pleases, whether that's staying here under new ownership or making her own way. Winona couldn't believe what she was hearing. This man, practically a stranger, was offering to buy her freedom. Harold's face contorted with rage. Who do you think you are, coming onto my land and telling me how to conduct my affairs? I'm the man with the money to solve your problems, Lewis, Orion replied evenly. Take it or leave it, but know this: I'll not be party to treating Miss Lewis as anything less than the lady she is. For a moment, Winona thought her father might strike Orion. Instead, Harold's shoulders sagged in defeat. $5,000, he muttered, not a penny less. It was an outrageous sum, far more than the failing ranch was worth. Winona held her breath, certain Orion would refuse. Done, Orion said without hesitation. I'll have the papers drawn up tomorrow. Harold's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with calculation. And what about Winona? Before Orion could answer, Winona stepped forward. I am not part of this transaction, father. Mr. Hayes made that quite clear. Orion nodded. The lady's right. This is strictly a land deal. What Miss Lewis chooses to do after is entirely her decision. Harold glared at his daughter. And where do you suppose you'll go? You've got no family, no prospects. I'll figure something out, Winona replied, lifting her chin defiantly. Orion cleared his throat. Miss Lewis, if I may, my housekeeper recently returned east to care for her ailing mother. The position is open, should you be interested. Full wages, of course, and a cottage of your own on the property. Winona studied him, searching for any hidden motives in his expression. But all she saw was sincerity and perhaps something else: respect. That's very kind of you, Mr. Hayes, she said carefully. I would like to consider your offer. Take all the time you need, Orion replied, replacing his hat. I'll return tomorrow with the money and papers. He turned to Harold, his expression hardening once more. Until then, Mr. Lewis. With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Winona to face her father's wrath alone. The moment Orion disappeared from view, Harold rounded on her. You ungrateful little don't, Winona interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. You just sold our home. You tried to sell me. You don't get to call me ungrateful. Harold raised his hand as if to strike her, then thought better of it. Fine, go with him if you want. But don't come crying back when you realize what he really wants from you. At least he had the decency to offer me a choice, Winona shot back, which is more than I can say for my own father. She stormed into the house, climbed the stairs to her room, and began packing her belongings. Whatever tomorrow brought, she knew one thing for certain: she would never again allow herself to be treated as a commodity. True to his word, Orion Hayes returned the next day with a lawyer from town and a canvas bag heavy with cash. Winona watched from the parlor window as her father signed away the Lewis homestead, his expression a mixture of greed and resentment as he counted out the money. When the business was concluded, Orion approached the house. Winona met him at the door, carpetbag in hand. You're ready to leave, then? He asked, genuine surprise in his voice. If your offer of employment still stands, she replied. He nodded. It does. But Miss Lewis, I want to be clear, you're under no obligation to accept. The purchase of this ranch was not contingent on your decision. I understand that, Mr. Hayes, Winona said, but I've made my choice. I'd rather work for an honest wage than stay here with a father who sees me as nothing more than another asset to be liquidated. Something like admiration flashed in Orion's eyes. Very well, my wagon is around back. We can leave whenever you're ready. Winona glanced over her shoulder at her father, who refused to look at her. I'm ready now. The journey to Orion's ranch took less than an hour, but to Winona, it felt like crossing into another world entirely. The Hayes property was everything the Lewis homestead was not: thriving, well-maintained, with a sturdy main house and several outbuildings nestled in a valley protected by pine-covered hills. It's beautiful, she murmured as they approached. Thank you, Orion replied. It's taken a lot of work, but I believe anything worth having is worth working for. He showed her to a small but comfortable cottage near the main house, explaining her duties as housekeeper, cooking, cleaning, and managing the household inventory. The wages he offered were more than fair, and the quarters were far nicer than she'd expected. "I'll leave you to get settled," he said, standing awkwardly at the door. "Dinner is at 6 in the main house if you'd care to join me. Otherwise, the pantry is stocked and you're welcome to prepare something here." "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," Winona said. "For everything," he nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Please call me Orion." "Orion," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her tongue. "And I'm Winona." "I know," he said softly, then cleared his throat. "Until dinner, then." As the weeks passed, Winona settled into life at the Hayes Ranch with surprising ease. The work was hard but satisfying, and Orion proved to be a fair and respectful employer. They shared meals most evenings, their conversations gradually extending beyond ranch matters to books, politics, and personal histories. She learned that Orion had come to Wyoming after losing his parents to influenza in Texas, seeking a fresh start away from painful memories. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, of breeding the finest cattle in the territory, of creating something lasting in this wild, beautiful land. In turn, Winona told him about growing up on the failing Lewis homestead, about her mother's gentle strength and her father's slow descent into bitterness after years of drought and bad luck. She spoke of her love for the open spaces, for the freedom she felt when riding alone across the prairie. What she didn't tell him was how her heart had begun to quicken whenever he entered a room, or how she found herself lingering over his mending, fingers tracing the strong lines of his shirts, imagining the man who wore them. One evening in late September, a sudden thunderstorm caught them both by surprise. Orion had been showing Winona a new colt in the stables when the sky opened up, rain pouring down in sheets. They made a dash for the main house, arriving soaked to the skin and laughing. "You look like a drowned cat," Orion chuckled, pushing wet hair from his forehead. "And you look like a drowned bear," Winona retorted, wringing water from her skirts. Their eyes met, and suddenly the laughter died away, replaced by something electric and unspoken. Winona was acutely aware of how her wet blouse clung to her body, of the way Orion's gaze dropped momentarily before he turned away, clearing his throat. "You should change into something dry," he said, his voice rough. "I'll stoke the fire." Winona nodded, retreating to her cottage where she kept a spare dress for emergencies. When she returned to the main house, her hair still damp but properly pinned, she found Orion by the fire in fresh clothes, 2 glasses of whiskey on the table beside him. "I thought you might want something to warm you up," he said, offering her one. She accepted it with a small smile, remembering how her mother had always frowned upon ladies drinking spirits. But her mother wasn't here, and the amber liquid burned pleasantly as it went down, warming her from the inside out. "May I ask you something, Winona?" Orion said suddenly. She nodded, curious about the serious turn his expression had taken. "That day at your father's ranch. If I hadn't interfered, would you have gone along with his plan?" The question caught her off guard. She considered it carefully before answering. "No," she said finally. "I'd have run away first. Probably tried to make it to Cheyenne, find work there." Orion nodded, relief evident in his face. "I'm glad to hear that. May I ask you something now?" Winona ventured. "Anything?" "Why did you do it? By the ranch, I mean. It wasn't worth nearly what you paid." Orion swirled the whiskey in his glass, staring into the amber depths. "I've seen men like your father before, men who view women as property, as means to an end. My own mother." He paused, jaw tightening. "My father was a good man, but his brother wasn't. After my father died, my uncle tried to force my mother to marry him to keep the family ranch. She refused, and he made her life hell for it." "I'm sorry," Winona said softly. "Don't be." She was stronger than he ever gave her credit for, stronger than I knew, too. Orion met her gaze. "When I saw how your father was treating you, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. And yes, I wanted the land, I won't lie about that, but mostly I wanted to give you a choice." Something warm unfurled in Winona's chest, a feeling so tender and new that she hardly dared acknowledge it. "Thank you," she whispered. The storm raged outside, but inside, seated before the fire with this man who'd given her freedom when her own father would have sold her, Winona felt a peace she hadn't known in years. As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch's pace slowed. Cattle were moved to sheltered pastures, supplies were stockpiled, and preparations made for the harsh Wyoming winter ahead. Winona found herself spending more time in the main house, often reading by the fire in the evenings while Orion worked on accounts or wrote letters to distant business associates. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, their initial employer-employee relationship gradually blurring into something more like friendship. Orion began teaching Winona about the business side of ranching, explaining cattle markets and breeding programs, soliciting her opinions on expansion plans. For her part, Winona transformed the once Spartan house into a true home, adding curtains she'd sewn herself, arranging wildflowers in jars when weather permitted, and filling the rooms with the aromas of home-cooked meals that were a far cry from the basic fare Orion had been living on. The ranch hands noticed the change in their boss, how he smiled more often, how he no longer worked from dawn until well after dusk, instead making time for evenings by the fire with the auburn-haired woman who'd arrived in late summer. The first heavy snow came in early December, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Winona woke to a transformed world, the familiar landscape rendered new and magical. She hurried through her morning chores, eager to step outside and experience the winter wonderland. She found Orion by the corral, checking on the horses. He turned at the sound of her approach, his face lighting up in a way that made her heart skip. "Your first Wyoming blizzard," he said, gesturing to the snow-covered expanse around them. "What do you think?" "It's beautiful," Winona breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Though I imagine the novelty wears off by February," Orion laughed. "You're not wrong about that." A mischievous impulse seized her, and before she could think better of it, Winona scooped up a handful of snow and flung it at him. It caught him square in the chest, exploding in a puff of white. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed playfully. "You realize this means war, Miss Lewis." What followed was the most undignified, joyful snow battle Winona had ever experienced. They chased each other around the yard like children, hurling snowballs and ducking behind trees and fences for cover. The ranch hands stopped to watch, nudging each other and grinning at the sight of their normally serious boss laughing like a schoolboy. It ended when Orion caught her around the waist as she tried to flee, both of them tumbling into a snowdrift. Suddenly she was beneath him, his weight partially supported on his elbows, their faces inches apart and breath clouding in the cold air between them. Time seemed to stop as they stared at each other, laughter fading into something deeper, more intense. Winona was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the snowflakes melting in his dark hair, of his eyes darkening as they dropped to her lips. "Winona," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she dared not name. A whoop from one of the watching ranch hands broke the spell. Orion rolled away, helping Winona to her feet with a gentlemanly hand that betrayed none of the heat that had flared between them moments before. "We should get inside before we catch our death," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Winona nodded, brushing snow from her skirts with hands that trembled slightly. Yes, that would be wise. But as they walked back to the house in silence, she knew something fundamental had shifted between them, and there would be no going back to the easy companionship they'd enjoyed before. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite the isolated nature of the ranch. Winona decorated the main house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Orion surprised her by returning from a supply run to town with a small tree strapped to his saddle. "I thought we might celebrate properly," he said, looking almost shy as he set it up in the corner of the sitting room. Together they decorated it with paper stars Winona cut from old catalogs, strings of dried berries, and a few glass ornaments Orion produced from a dusty box treasures from his childhood in Texas. On Christmas Eve, the ranch hands were invited to the main house for a feast. Winona had been cooking for days, preparing ham, potatoes, cornbread, and 3 different pies. The men arrived in their Sunday best, hair slicked down with water, faces scrubbed pink. The evening was filled with stories, laughter, and after-dinner music. One of the hands produced a fiddle, another a harmonica, and soon the furniture was pushed back for dancing. Winona found herself passed from partner to partner, spinning and laughing until her cheeks hurt from smiling. Finally, Orion claimed her for a dance, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked as they moved together across the floor. "Very much," she replied. "It's the nicest Christmas I can remember in years." Something softened in his expression. "I'm glad." As the evening wound down and the hands took their leave, full of food and good cheer, Winona began clearing the dishes. Orion stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Leave those until morning," he said. "I have something for you." He led her to the sitting room where the tree glowed with candles carefully placed on the branches. Beneath it sat a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "You didn't have to get me anything," Winona protested, even as a pleased flush rose to her cheeks. "I wanted to," Orion replied, handing her the package. "Open it." Inside was a leather-bound journal, the cover tooled with a delicate pattern of wildflowers. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the supple leather. "You mentioned once that you used to write stories as a girl," Orion said. "I thought perhaps you might like to start again." Tears pricked at Winona's eyes. The gift wasn't expensive or extravagant, but the thought behind it, the fact that he had listened, had remembered something she'd mentioned in passing, touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said, voice thick with emotion. "I have something for you too, though it's not much." She retrieved a package from her apron pocket and handed it to him. Orion unwrapped it carefully to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "I noticed your old one was fraying," Winona explained, "and this color matches your eyes." Orion looked up at her, something unguarded and vulnerable in his expression. "No one's made me anything by hand since my mother died." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity but with such raw honesty, broke Winona's heart a little. Before she could think better of it, she stepped forward and kissed his cheek. "Merry Christmas, Orion," she whispered. He caught her hand as she began to pull away. "Winona," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. "There's something I need to tell you." She looked up at him, heart hammering in her chest. "Yes, I didn't hire you just because you needed work," he admitted. "And I didn't buy your father's ranch just to give you a choice, though that was part of it." "Then why?" she asked, scarcely daring to breathe. "Because from the moment I saw you standing on that porch, so fierce and proud despite everything, I couldn't look away." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I know it's too soon, and I know I'm your employer, and if you don't feel the same way, I'll never mention it again," but Winona silenced him with a finger to his lips. "I feel the same way," she said simply. The joy that bloomed across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Orion leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Winona Lewis. I think I have from the first moment I saw you." "And I love you, Orion Hayes," she whispered back. "My rescuer, my friend, my heart." The blizzard that howled outside that night kept Winona at the main house, sleeping in the guest room while Orion took the sofa, both of them unwilling to risk gossip among the hands. But the next morning, when she emerged to find him cooking breakfast in the kitchen, hair tousled from sleep and wearing the blue scarf despite the warmth of the house, Winona knew she had found her home. New Year's Day brought an unexpected visitor to the Hayes Ranch. Winona was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Looking out the window, she froze at the sight of her father's battered rig coming up the drive. Orion came in from the study, alerted by the barking of the ranch dogs. "Are you expecting anyone?" he asked, then followed her gaze. His expression hardened when he recognized the visitor. "Stay inside if you wish, I'll handle this." "No," Winona said, straightening her shoulders. "I'll come with you." They met Harold Lewis at the front porch steps. He looked thinner than Winona remembered, his eyes hollow with defeat or perhaps illness. "Mr. Lewis," Orion greeted him coolly. "What brings you to my property?" Harold's gaze flicked between them, noting their unified stance. "I came to speak with my daughter," he said, his voice lacking its usual bluster. "Privately, if you don't mind." "Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of Orion," Winona replied, crossing her arms. Harold sighed, removing his hat. "Very well. I've come to apologize, Winona. What I did trying to trade you like property was unforgivable. Your mother would have horsewhipped me for even thinking of it." The unexpected apology threw Winona off balance. "Why now?" she asked suspiciously. Because I'm dying, Harold said bluntly. Consumption, the doctor says. Got 6 months if I'm lucky, and I don't want to go to my grave with this between us. Winona's knees weakened, and she felt Orion's steadying hand at the small of her back. Whatever her father had done, he was still the man who had taught her to ride, who had once carried her on his shoulders to see a circus parade in town. I'm sorry to hear that, she said finally. Harold nodded, accepting her response for the limited forgiveness it was. You look well, he observed. Happy even. I am, Winona confirmed, unconsciously leaning closer to Orion. Her father's gaze sharpened as he took in the subtle gesture. I see, he said, looking at Orion with new understanding. So that's how it is. Yes, sir, it is, Orion replied steadily. I intend to ask for your daughter's hand, with or without your blessing. Harold barked a laugh that ended in a worrying cough. Well, I'll be damned. Looks like you got the girl after all, Hayes. I didn't get anyone, Orion corrected him firmly. Winona chose me just as I chose her. Of her own free will. Harold studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. He turned to Winona. For what it's worth, I'm glad you found someone who values you properly. Your mother would have liked him. It was the closest thing to a blessing they were likely to get, and Winona felt a knot inside her loosen slightly. Would you like to stay for dinner, Father? She offered. It's a long ride back to town. Harold seemed surprised by the invitation. I'd appreciate that, he said gruffly. The meal was awkward but civil. Harold spoke little of himself, instead asking questions about the ranch and listening with genuine interest as Orion explained his plans for expansion in the spring. When it was time for him to leave, he paused at the door, turning to his daughter. I sold most of what was left after Hayes here took the land, he told her. There's a bit of money set aside at the bank in Cheyenne. It'll come to you when I'm gone, not much, but maybe enough for a proper wedding dress. It was the nearest he could come to giving them his blessing, and Winona felt tears sting her eyes as she nodded. Thank you, Father. He touched her cheek once briefly, then turned and walked to his wagon without looking back. They watched him drive away, Orion's arm around Winona's waist, until he disappeared over the ridge. Are you all right? Orion asked softly. Winona nodded, wiping away a stray tear. Yes, I think I am. That night, seated by the fire in what had become their customary evening ritual, Orion took her hand. Did you mean what you said to your father? About choosing me, of course, Winona replied. Did you mean what you said about asking for my hand? In answer, Orion reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment, he admitted, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl. It was my mother's. Winona's breath caught. Orion. I know it hasn't been long, he said, and if you think we're rushing, I'll understand. But I love you, Winona Lewis. I love your strength and your kindness, your fierce spirit and gentle heart. I want to build a life with you not as my housekeeper, but as my wife, my partner in everything. Tears spilled down Winona's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Orion slid the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. They were married that spring, in a ceremony attended by the entire ranch staff and a few friends from neighboring properties. Harold Lewis, too ill to travel, sent a letter of congratulations and a pair of silver candlesticks that had belonged to Winona's mother. As they spoke their vows beneath an arbor of fresh greenery, with the mountains rising majestic in the distance, Winona thought of the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. Her father's desperate attempt to trade her for land had led her to the man she now pledged her life to, the man who had valued her freedom enough to buy the whole damn place. I promise to cherish and respect you all the days of my life, Orion said, his voice steady as he slid the gold band onto her finger to join her mother's pearl. To be your partner and your friend, to honor your independence even as we build our life together. And I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes, Winona replied, her heart full to bursting. To love you faithfully and fearlessly, to make our house a home and our ranch a legacy we can be proud of. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting under lantern light. As the last guests departed and they found themselves alone in the main house, their house now, Orion pulled Winona into his arms. Happy Mrs. Hayes, he murmured against her hair. Happier than I ever dreamed possible, she replied, lifting her face for his kiss. In the years that followed, the Hayes Ranch prospered, expanding to become one of the largest and most respected operations in the territory. Winona proved to be not just a wife but a true partner, her keen mind for business complementing Orion's practical knowledge of cattle and land. Harold Lewis passed peacefully that winter, reconciled with his daughter and at peace with the choices she'd made. The money he left her, modest though it was, went toward the building of a schoolhouse on the ranch, where the children of hands and neighboring homesteaders could receive an education regardless of their means. Their own first child, a daughter with Orion's blue eyes and Winona's auburn hair, arrived the following summer, followed by a son 2 years later. The nursery that had once been Orion's study rang with laughter and the patter of small feet, and the ranch house truly became the home Winona had always dreamed of creating. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Orion surprised Winona with the deed to a small parcel of land, the eastern pasture that had once been part of her father's ranch, the piece of property that had sparked their unlikely love story. "I thought we might build a little cabin there," he explained as they stood on the rise overlooking the valley. "Somewhere we can go when we want to be alone, away from the bustle of the main ranch." "I love it," Winona said, leaning into his embrace. "But you know, when I think about it now, I almost want to thank my father for what he did." "Thank him?" Orion raised an eyebrow in surprise. "If he hadn't tried to trade me for land, you wouldn't have offered to buy the whole place," Winona explained, "and we might never have found each other." Orion smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Oh, I'd have found you somehow," he assured her. "Some things are just meant to be." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Winona knew he was right. Their love had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances, born from one man's greed and another's indignation. But it had grown into something rare and precious, a partnership of equals, a family bound by love and respect. In a land where women were too often treated as property, Orion Hayes had seen Winona Lewis as a person of value beyond measure. And in doing so, he had won far more than land. He had won a love strong enough to last a lifetime.